For those of you who are online and in the room, I would like to remind you that we suspended our meeting last week. Last Tuesday, we're not starting a new meeting. So this is still meeting 38. Like I said, I call this meeting to order. Welcome to the continuation of meeting 38 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Official Languages. This meeting is held in a hybrid format and is public. So today we will be resuming debate on Mr. Serre's motion. In order to comply with the procedural norms, we will resume debate on the sub-amendments proposed by Mr. Beaulieu. I'd like to remind you the following. In order to structure the debate, we will first discuss Mr. Beaulieu's sub-amendments, vote on the sub-amendments one after the other, and then we will discuss Mr. Godin's amendments. We will vote on those amendments. And then finally, we'll discuss the main motion and vote on the main motion that was tabled by Mr. Serre. If there are no questions regarding procedure, we will pick up where we left off, and we will give the floor to Mr. Beaulieu. But before, is everyone on the same page? Ms. Ashton? Yes, hello, everyone. Mr. Chair, I would also like to present an amendment during today's meeting. Of course, no problem. But are there any issues relating to the instructions? Because this is the first time that we continue a meeting that was not finished. So I just wanted to make sure everyone was on the same page. If everyone's on the same page, we will move on to the amendment by Mr. Beaulieu. I see a hand up. I think it's Mr. Généreux. Yes, we understand the principle. That's fine. If I understand correctly, other amendments, sub-amendments will be proposed. So now we might have 3 amendments, 1 amendment, and 2 sub-amendments. We might end up spending a significant amount of time on this discussion, but I wanted to make sure that we will be able to speak at some point during the meeting that only lasts 2 hours. I think I understand your question. When we suspended the meeting on Tuesday, Mr. Beaulieu had tabled his sub-amendments. We'll hear it now. And we also had a list of speakers. After Mr. Beaulieu, it'll be Mr. Généreux, Mr. Viss, Mr. Dalton, and Mr. Gourde. That's where we left off last Tuesday. For now, we'll respect this speaking order, although more people may be added. That being said, I think everything's clear for everyone. Mr. Beaulieu, you have the floor. You were about to table a sub-amendment. If I may, I'd like to continue about Mr. Serre's amendment. The amendment of the motion by Mr. Serre. My apologies. So overall, with the direction, I agree. But he's suggesting that there be no limit on the clause-by-clause debate. I'm aligned with that. But I think we should still have time to hear from witnesses. I think it's very important. Ever since the NDP and Liberals created their alliance, there have been time allocation motions and all sorts of activities to reduce debate. There were all sorts of motions that were adopted, 18 time allocations, many super gag orders, many to accelerate the stages of the work in the committee, the report stage, the third reading, motions to accelerate second readings at committees. On October 26th, there was a time allocation on C9. I'm sorry, Mr. Beaulieu, I would like to interrupt you very quickly. You were referring to Mr. Serré, but I think you meant Mr. Godin. Yes, Mr. Godin, that's what I meant. So your amendment, your sub-amendment to Mr. Godin's amendment will not be tabled? Well, I'll bring other sub-amendments, but they kind of share a theme. Procedure could become complicated, and that's why in my introduction I said that we needed to proceed one sub-amendment at a time. Yes, you can table more than one, but we're going to go one at a time. Well, I have one sub-amendment that has many steps to it. Well, go ahead then. So what I was saying was that it's important for us to have this debate. This debate is essential. When we look at the motions of closures and the other gag orders that were adopted. Mr. Chair, a point of order, please. Yes, Mr. Serré. We had over 12 meetings, 54 witnesses, 21 briefs were submitted. I think earlier you also mentioned that twice that he wanted to table his amendment because now we're going back to the debate on the motion. Does Mr. Beaulieu have a sub-amendment to table because he keeps on saying yes, but then continues on with his debate? I understand. Dear friends, I know that this is an impassioned debate. It's important to everyone. I think when someone has the floor, I think we should let each person finish. And it's up to me to call them to order if I don't think they're going to get to the point. Mr. Beaulieu, you were going to propose a sub-amendment to Mr. Godin's amendment. That's where we're at. I'd like to come back to my amendment. What I'm trying to say is that it's very important to have the time to invite witnesses, hear from them. There are also witnesses from Francophone and Acadian communities that had very important points to raise. It's not just about Quebec, but let's talk about Quebec. Ours is the only government that produced a first document that presented its priorities. These priorities wanted to be in charge of its own linguistic clauses on its own territory because it's the only Francophone majority state in all of Canada and North America. We say that we need to recognize that Quebec is, according to the government, is the heart of Francophonie in Canada. So if we weaken Quebec, we weaken all Francophone and Acadian communities. Quebec is where professors come from, provides professors to university outside of Quebec in French language universities. We represent an important market for Francophone and Acadian communities. We're also a cultural hub. Think about Kevin Parent and other artists from Francophone and Acadian communities. If French is weakened in Quebec, and the statistics have shown it, in Quebec there are more Francophones that are becoming anglicized. There has been some progress on getting immigrants to adopt French, but this progress came because of an immigration agreement. This agreement allows Quebec to choose its immigrants, and Quebec selected Francotropic immigrants, so immigrants that come from Francophone countries or Latin countries like Latin Americans. These people learn French more easily and can integrate more easily into French culture in Quebec. This was a major factor in Quebec. The other major element was Bill 101. It included dispositions that affected education. The greatest move that Quebec did for inclusion was Bill 101. This allowed children from all sorts of cultural backgrounds to find themselves in the same schools, to interact with one another. And since then, there are more and more allophones that speak French in Quebec. This also allowed Quebecois children to get used to interacting with people that come from other cultures. I think this is very important. We have to be open. This is what helps integration. The problem we had was with the federal government. The federal government has done all sorts of things. And when we look at the requests from the Quebec government, there is one request that comes back over and over. They ask that the Official Languages Act should recognize that French is the only minority official language. From our point of view, since its inception, the Bloc has often said that Francophone and Acadian communities and Anglophone communities in Quebec are not at all the same thing. The Anglophone community in Quebec used to be the elite, and they were an elite within the Anglophone community in Canada. They held dominant institutions that had tons of funding. If you think about schools, universities, hospitals, even in the 60s. In the 60s, the Quebec government tried to act on the education front. There was a commission on education. There was the Parent report. There was also a commission on language. So that's when things started to simmer. And we established the CEGEP structure. We also established the Université du Québec. The education level of Francophones had been historically lower. We've definitely made progress, but we still have work to do. For the federal government to consider Anglophones in Quebec as an equal minority compared to Acadians and Francophones outside of Quebec has been criticized since forever. I saw an editorial from Lise Bissonnette in 1967. She said that if we use the same criteria, it makes no sense to say that Anglophones in Quebec are the same as Francophones and Acadians outside of Quebec. She said that perhaps even Anglophones in Quebec should be funding Francophones outside of Quebec. Of course, this is not a real suggestion that we're proposing, but it gives you an idea. I think it makes no sense. This false equivalence has preserved the privilege that the Anglophones in Quebec held. It's a vestige of the colonial past. And after 1763, there were all sorts of maneuvers in Quebec. I think at a certain point, French schools weren't even receiving funding anymore. Mr. Beaulieu, we were talking about sub-amendments and the amendment by Mr. Godin. I've given you broad latitude, but you need to get back to it. Okay, yes. So we have to recognize that Quebec, French is the only minority official language in Canada. I think this is very important to recognize. The Official Languages Act should show an asymmetry in favor of French because You know, the Official Languages Act is actually undermining the application of Bill 101. Mr. Godin, I think you mean Mr. Beaulieu. Mr. Beaulieu, my apologies. Are you reformulating your sub-amendment? I just want to explain the general concept behind the sub-amendment. This is something that I started talking about in the last meeting. I think we need to expand on Mr. Godin's motion. We need more time to hear from witnesses. That's where I was at. Now, I'm continuing in that direction. The last part of my amendment speaks to the fact that we need to prioritize amendments for Quebec in the clause-by-clause study. Okay, let's start with the first one, Mr. Beaulieu, and then we can move on after. It's not clear how you're trying to modify your sub-amendment. How are you trying to modify Mr. Godin's amendment? Well, I can start reading the amendment, but I'd first like to set the stage. And then we can deal with it accordingly. I see Mr. Serré seeming to want to say something.
Look, it's been 20 minutes. With all due respect for my colleague, Mr. Beaulieu, normally you would move an amendment and then have a discussion. It's an entirely legitimate move. Well, Chair, what I'm saying is... I mean, is Mr. Beaulieu filibustering, or does he want to propose something? We've been talking about this for 20 minutes. Well, I could ask just as well. Is this some kind of gag order on your end? Mr. Beaulieu. I think that everyone around the table understand that I give a lot of leeway surrounding discussions. But we are talking about the main motion from Mr. Serré. Mr. Godin has moved an amendment. And, you know, as chair, I'm giving a lot of leeway. That's my responsibility. Now, Tuesday, you led us on a different direction. You said, I have a sub-amendment. And then we adjourned. So I tend to agree that you're giving some kind of a history lecture. Please get back to your sub-amendment. Otherwise, there are 4 other people who want to take the floor. Well, history is very important. If we don't know our history, we don't know who we are, and we don't know where we're going. But I will get back to the amendments. Mr. Beaulieu. Mr. Beaulieu. Go ahead. Sincerely, I'm giving you one more chance to talk about the amendments. So, my sub-amendment, I had just gotten to the second point of Mr. Godin's amendment, where it talks about 5 p.m. on November 24th, and I talked about replacing this with Tuesday, December 6th, 2022. And then I also change the date to the 25th of November for submitting amendments. Well, that's what was there before. I'm proposing moving it back to Wednesday, December 7th. So from the 24th to the 6th, and from the 25th to the 7th. So everything lines up. A third point, well, the third point I'm not getting into. Mr. Beaulieu, I'll stop you there. That's how procedure works. You have to do things one at a time. A point of order, Chair. What you're doing is splitting my amendment in half. Mr. Saray and Mr. Godin both got to move their amendments in full. So you're taking what I propose and cutting it in half. I think that I should have the right to propose my full sub-amendment. I'm just trying to follow what's going on. Are the amendments that you want to, do the sub-amendments that you want to propose link in with what you've brought earlier? Yes, they link in very directly with what Mr. Saray and Mr. Godin propose. So it's all one piece, just like theirs. So Mr. Godin moved one amendment. He had a nice bundle of measures that he proposed all at once. Well, look, I can send you a written version of what I'm proposing. What we can do is vote on your sub-amendment and then move on to your other sub-amendments. No, that won't do. Regarding point 4 of point of order, Chair. Mr. Genereux has a point of order. Could Mr. Beaulieu possibly send his package of amendments to the clerk? Would that be possible? It would certainly be appreciated. I don't know if it already got sent out. If not, I'd be happy to send my measures over. What I have are the 2 date changes for points 1 and 2, changing the 24th to the 6th. So you should have received the full proposal. Okay, there it is. Okay, we're going to take a few moments. Would I be able to circulate the full document as I received it? All right, it's been sent out.
Okay, Monsieur Beaulieu, je pense que...
All right, Mr. Beaulieu, I believe that everyone has received the document. Please go ahead, and now everyone will be able to follow on the document. All right, so looking at point 2, you'll see exactly what I spoke about. I hope I won't have to repeat myself. Moving on to point 3, I have no amendments there. This is the one that gets the clerk of the committee to write immediately to each member who is not a member of a caucus represented on the committee to inform them of the study on the bill. Meanwhile, in point 4, we will replace the reference to November 29th in Mr. Godin's amendment with no earlier than December 8th at 11 o'clock. And then, if the committee proceed with clause-by-clause consideration, no later than Tuesday, December 8th. Point 5, I propose to remove it and replace it with what follows, as I was trying to explain earlier, that during the clause-by-clause study of Bill C-13, the committee prioritize amendments coming from the government of Quebec and from Francophone minority communities, including 1. That's Section 2 of C13 be amended by adding the following: that the government respects the choice of Quebec in terms of its language policy under the Charter of the French language. 2, that Section 2 of C13 be amended noting that French is the official and common language of Quebec. C, that there be a reference noting that Francophone and Anglophone minorities are present in all provinces and territories, and that the Anglophone minority in Quebec has different needs from the Francophone minorities in other provinces and territories, that it recognizes a majority Francophone homeland in Quebec where the future of French is guaranteed and represents a legitimate objective and fundamental premise in the official languages policy. 3, that C13 be amended in Section 3 by replacing line 34, page 3 with what follows. Mr. Beaulieu, I apologize, but going back to what I spoke about earlier, I'm hoping we could talk about your first amendment. Right now, you're preempting clause by proposing to amend the Act. This is not a sub-amendment to Mr. Gaudin's motion. You're really getting away from the substance of the sub-amendment. So please, first we will talk about matters relating to Mr. Gaudin's amendment. Can I comment on what you said? Mr. Beaulieu, no. What you're trying to do is amend the bill before clause by clause. I'm not trying to amend the bill. I'm just trying to talk about what we will bring up in clause by clause. That has nothing to do with Mr. Gaudin's amendment. That is my decision. We'll talk about your first proposal for a sub-amendment, unless you withdraw it. That is about Mr. Gaudin's amendment. But point 5 of Mr. Gaudin's motion is being substituted out. We are noting that there should be no deadline for clause by clause. We are noting that Quebec's proposal should be prioritized. Mr. Beaulieu, I don't want to have to repeat myself. You cannot propose to amend the bill. Okay, if you must, we will start with the first 2 points. But I do wish for my entire sub-amendment to be considered. I don't find it out of order. I'm listing the amendments that we will have to start with during clause by clause. Before I go any further, Ms. Lattanzio on a point of order. Thank you, Chair. Chair. I would like the clerk to possibly weigh in. Because what we are faced with is changes that have nothing to do with Mr. Gaudin's motion. I mean, maybe there's a bit of a connection. But what Mr. Beaulieu is proposing is a big mix of procedural measures and exhaustive amendments to the bill itself. So I find that this motion is out of order, and I'd like to have the chair weigh in. Certainly, Ms. Lattanzio, that is exactly what I was thinking. We can now go over to the clerk. All right, so I'm just going to open the amendment. Here I have the sub-amendments. clause by clause will need to take place in a particular order. So it's not possible to change the order clause by clause is carried out. Does that answer your question, Ms. Latanzio? Madam Clerk, I was hoping you could tell us whether Mr. Beaulier's sub-amendment is in order, because it's a big mix. Some parts of Mr. Godin's sub-amendment talk about our deadlines, while others talk about how to amend the bill. We haven't even set out a timeline for studying the bill. So it looks like Mr. Beaulier is getting ahead of the committee. The committee still has not decided on a deadline. And it looks like this sub-amendment is a backdoor approach to amending to the clause-by-clause process. I find it out of order. And I'd like to have your opinion and the opinion of our chair on how we should proceed. Amendments to the motion and to other amendments are receivable. So points 1 to 5 are receivable. But the section that begins that's during clause by clause, well, that section is not receivable. Mr. Arsenault, you might wish to respond, and then we could talk on the phone. No, I don't need to suspend. I think everything is very clear. Mr. Beaulier, go ahead. Well, that means that we're the committee to start with one part of clause by clause instead of going through it in order. But that would not be allowed? Mr. Beaulier, what would need to happen would be a motion. We are talking about an amendment to, or a sub-amendment rather, to Mr. Godin's amendment. And the only receivable parts of your sub-amendment are 1 to 5, and that's it. But what if I tabled a different motion later? No, it would not be receivable. Maybe I don't quite follow. Is it a rule that all committees need to carry out clause by clause in chronological order? Mr. Beaulier, right now, we are talking about Mr. Godin's amendment. Your sub-amendment is not entirely about that. So I would suggest we have a vote on what you propose for points 1 to 5 in the document you sent us. Is that all right? Yes, exactly. Chair? I'm not sure I agree with... I see what the chair is saying, but... Point 5 is all about getting rid of the last paragraph. Yet, even though it's getting rid of the final paragraph, it starts in the following paragraph. So really, we would not be able to consider that it would be 1 to 4. Certainly. Because I see, because paragraph 5 does not have anything to do with Mr. Godin's amendment. Does anyone have anything else to say about Mr. Beaulier's sub-amendment? We are talking about 1 to 4, getting rid of 5. Chair? I challenge your decision. I will now hear from Ms. Latanzio, who has her hand raised. Over to you, Ms. Latanzio. I'm sorry, Chair. Could you formally rule on what is in point 5? Can you rule that it is non-receivable? I hereby rule that everything after the crossed-out portion is unreceivable. Chair, I believe that was Mr. Genereux. I just want to make sure we are all on the same page and that the journals are updated accordingly. Could the clerk publicly say that the sections in Mr. Beaulieu's, certain sections of Mr. Beaulieu's amendments are irreceivable? We will suspend briefly.
Can everyone hear me, Madam Clerk? Mr. Beaulieu? Indeed, what I feared has come about, and that's why I wanted to deal with the sub-amendments one at a time. As you indicated that the document is an overall sub-amendment, one single sub-amendment, part of that document is not in order under the standing orders. And, of course, that's the section after paragraph 5. So if you want the entire document to constitute your sub-amendment and such that the entire document is in order, as I mentioned earlier, everything to do with paragraphs 1 to 5 inclusive is in order. And when I say paragraph 5, well, in fact, paragraph 4, because your paragraph 5 seems to include at the tail end a list of the clause-by-clause proposals, and that is out of order. So here's what I would suggest as a measure of fair play. You submit your sub-amendments to do with paragraphs 1 and 4 as they stand, and we forget the others. Otherwise, I'll have to knock back the entire document in its entirety. So what do you have to say? Well, in that case, let's do that, Mr. Chairperson. The only thing that I just wanted to shed some light on here as a separate point, and it's that in our understanding, it's in chronological order, clause by clause. But is there somewhere in the legislation that states that the committee isn't allowed to amend the law in this manner? Well, I won't respond to that question because it's not officially on the floor, but you have an inkling of the answer to that question, don't you, already? Well, let's start with the initial amendments and then we can take a look thereafter. We're in the sub-amendments to the amendments, so we'll stick to that. Just say yes or no. Are you in agreement that we deal with your sub-amendments, paragraphs 1 to 4? Is that okay? Mr. Chairperson, I have a question before Mr. Beaulieu responds. Yes, go ahead, Mr. Généreux. Is it on that point? Well, I don't have an answer to this question right now, obviously, but could we move an amendment, or a sub-amendment, I should say, to do with Mr. Beaulieu's sub-amendment? No, that's not possible. Not at all. Out of the question. Now, if I follow your rationale there, I'd be knocking back the entire document because part of it is out of order. But as Mr. Beaulieu has insisted that he is dealing with a whole slew of amendments under the umbrella of sub-amendments under the umbrella of his amendment, well, but I'm going to give an opportunity here to have us forget everything after paragraph 5 for the time being and vote on your sub-amendment, which includes paragraphs 1 to 4. Is that okay? Perfect. But, Madam Clerk, and we can come back to this later, but where is it stated in the procedural rules that a committee isn't entitled to amend the order of clause-by-clause consideration? We'll come back to that a bit later, if that's okay. Any other debate to do with Mr. Beaulieu's sub-amendment concerning paragraphs 1 to 4 of the document that has been sent in on page 1? If I could just ask a question, if I may, just by way of clarification, can we reread the text of the sub-amendment to make sure that everybody is on the same page? The sub-amendments that were raised at the end of the last meeting are not the same as those today. So, Mr. Beaulieu, are you proposing the amendment that you proposed in relation to the 6th and 7th of on the 6th and 7th for the 6th and 7th of December? I just want to make sure we're on the same page. What was the difference between that, the current, and my previous version? Well, what you just sent in now, there's no, the date of the 24th of November and 25th of November aren't amended at points 1 and 2. These are sub-amendments that were proposed at the tail end of the last meeting that were circulated to committee members. So technically we'd need unanimous consent to withdraw those sub-amendments. I see. Under Amendment 2, it states that the 24th of November would be replaced by the 6th of December. So if we can stick to that.
Pour garder la position de Colombie-Britannique aussi.
Le premier amendement de M. Godin, est-ce qu'il y avait une date le 24 novembre? Ah, OK. C'est bon. OK. Non, parce que la première...
Madame la greffière, le paragraphe...
Madam Clerk, paragraph 2, as it stands in Mr. Beaulieu's sub-amendment, reflects what was said earlier. Yes, that's true. I just want to confirm that point 2 is correct as it stands, but what about point 1? Well, that has to do with a deadline to hear testimony from ministers. We won't touch that. Point 2 has to do with a date to bring forward amendments to Bill C-13. And as we agreed, that was Mr. Serre's motion on the 6th of to do with the 6th of December. And then we'd start clause-by-clause consideration at that point. Are there any questions about this? Is it clear, Madam Clerk, or do we need to read anything out? No, if members are on the same page. Or Mr. Chairperson, I have a question. Ms. Latanzio first, please, Mr. Généreux. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. Now, based on what I just understood from the clerk, the amendments that were brought forward by Mr. Beaulieu this morning are not the same as those at the last meeting. So do we need unanimous consent at this stage of the game to dispose, before we dispose of this? And secondly, Mr. Chairperson, if this is agreed to, I'd like us to read through the amendments 1 to 4, paragraphs 1 to 4, before we move ahead with the vote. Madam Clerk, do you have any input on that? Well, theoretically, the committee does require unanimous consent to adopt these changes, and I can read the clauses out loud if you wish. Please proceed.
Donc, OK,
Well, is there unanimous consent first to allow Mr. Beaulieu to amend his sub-amendments? Well, all good on our end, Mr. Chair. I can't see anyone on the screen remotely who objects. Please proceed, Madam Clerk. Please read that out loud. Just give me a tick. So point 1 won't change. Then point 2. By substituting by 5 p.m. Thursday, 24th of November 2022 would be replaced by, well, I'll read the tail end. At the latest on Tuesday, the 6th of December 2022, the amendments to Bill C-13 be submitted to the clerk in both official languages and distributed to members of the committee in both official languages by noon on Friday, or rather on Wednesday, the 7th of December. Then point 3. And I'll read the other points when we get to them. Perhaps I can leave that for the time being. Agreed? Unless there are any other questions about this, one amendment at a time. Yes, that's how we'll proceed. Mr. Chairperson, just to make sure we're on the same page here. Now, were the amendment to not carry, well then point 4 would be the Tuesday, the 29th of November, that the committee proceed with clause-by-clause consideration. I'm just trying to ascertain whether paragraph 4 can be considered if the first paragraph doesn't pass. Mr. Chairperson, point 4. Please go ahead, Mr. Serret, on a point of order. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson, for recognising me. Earlier, it was stated that Mr. Beaulieu's amendments, well, there were a number of components to the amendment, but it was one single amendment, so we don't have to vote on each and every paragraph, one after another. There was one single amendment, an umbrella end amendment, and I think every party was in agreement on that fact, even Madam Clerk. It was one amendment, right? Perfect. So you're right, Mr. Serret. That was what was my understanding as well. I was a bit confused, but that's on me. Paragraph 2, Madam Clerk, you just read it. If you'd like to continue right through to paragraph 4.
So paragraph 3 wouldn't change based on Mr. Godin's amendments. And then paragraph 4. The committee would proceed to the clause-by-clause consideration of the bill on December 8th, 2022 at 11 at the latest. Any other questions regarding the sub-amendment? Yes, Mr. Chair, I had asked to speak earlier. Go ahead, Mr. Généreux, you have the floor. That's fine for the amendments, but I do have one observation. Mr. Beaulieu's intention behind point 5 that was since removed was to make some space for requests coming out of Quebec. We completely agree with what Mr. Beaulieu is proposing, insofar as what we're seeing in this motion from the Liberal Party is an intent to gag the rest of the witnesses that were planned to appear before this committee. I'm going to have to call you to order, Mr. Généreux. You have to stick to the subject at hand. I'm just speaking to the 5th point in Mr. Beaulieu's sub-amendment that was eliminated. Well, it was eliminated, Mr. Généreux. Well, I'm just trying to make sure everyone understands that Quebec is being gagged here. Do you have any comments about the sub-amendment presented by Mr. Beaulieu as it was read by the clerk? Mr. Chair, I would like to make a comment. What we decided here is based on the standing orders. I'm asking the opposition parties to respect the rules. The clerk has already spoken to it. That part has been removed because it's out of order. It's clear. So I don't understand why two of the opposition parties are insisting on this point when it's been clearly stated that it's out of order. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Serré. Indeed, that's what we all agreed on, based on the clerk's recommendations. So we're still on the sub-amendment proposed by Mr. Beaulieu, paragraphs 1 through 4, the rest being out of order. Any other comments relating to this sub-amendment before we vote? I would like to add some information, if I may. You can't modify or alter your sub-amendment. No, but I can defend it. But also, Mr. Viss would like to take the floor. Mr. Viss, I hadn't seen you. Please go ahead. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a point of clarification. How do we define francophone communities outside of Quebec? Is it just people who... Excuse me? Are these people who would like to learn French, who are in a French school, but that might have English as a first language? Or is it just people whose first language is French? Mr. Viss, are you speaking to Mr. Beaulieu's sub-amendment? Yes, in point number 5. There's no more point number 5. Oh, my apologies. It's so complicated with everything that's going on.
You're right. OK. D'autres questions?
Any other questions? Madam Clerk, are we moving on to the vote? Did you ask to speak? Mr. Gourde would like to speak. Go ahead, Mr. Gourde. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to make something clear for everyone who's watching in Canada. As you know, this meeting is televised. What I understand here is that we're about to vote on the sub-amendments that were proposed by Mr. Beaulieu, on the amendment of Mr. Godin, on Mr. Serré's motion. Is that correct? Okay, great. We'll end up understanding what's going on at one point, but I'm pretty sure that there's a lot of people at home. I'm sure there's a lot of people at home that are wondering what the heck is going on. So first the sub-amendment, and then the amendment from Mr. Godin, and then maybe we can finally vote on Mr. Serré's motion. So as long as everyone understands and everyone knows where we're at, that's good. There might be a few points on some punctuation. Mr. Gourde, I would say, I could say that we almost lost our way, but we're about to find our North Star again. So, Madam Clerk, are we ready to move to the vote? Can I add some information to justify how relevant my motion is? I think you've had plenty of time to do it, but is there something we haven't quite understood yet, a point you need to make? Well, I would like to say that the point of my sub-amendment is that we need more time to hear witnesses. I think this is important because we heard from a number of witnesses already. Someone said it was 50-ish who spoke on this one study. But there are many other witnesses that were slated to come, and I think they had very important and interesting points of view. Charles Castonguay wanted to speak to us about Mr. Beaulieu. You have a sub-amendment on the table. I think Mr. Dalton would like to take the floor. Mr. Dalton?
Thank you. So we support the sub-amendments of Monsieur Beaulieu, on number 5 with the official. Sorry, with not number 5. Okay, it is a little confusing, but you know what? I guess my colleague here, Jean Coul, referred to it. We're talking about amendments and sub-amendments, and I guess it's just a commentary on this. It's just very disappointing because this committee was working very well. This seems to be quite intentional by the Liberals to blow up the whole process for these. This is a very important bill. I know the Conservatives are very supportive of it, and we wanted to do something good. And yet, we've wasted the last meeting. We had witnesses that are not here now, that were not able to testify. We had more today. And in the meantime, we have a drop-dead date, according to the motion from Mr. Serre, MP Serre, of December the 1st, saying, well, if it doesn't work out, then we'll pass it on to the chair and he's going to make all the amendments. To me, this is a real lack of respect for all the witnesses for the years that have been waiting for something excellent. We want to see an excellent bill being brought forward. I think we all do on this committee. And so it's just very disappointing that we're having to go through this whole process in order to because of this motion. And it would seem to me that the Liberals are quite happy to have this debate being going on about these sub-amendments, and so they can say, oh, the opposition is just filibustering, and we better take care of it. They're just trying to turn the tables around when they have basically exploded this whole report. So that one of the we want to see the in the initial motion, which the sub-amendments say that we are going to expand it as far as the having ministers come here for longer. The initial motion was to have all three of them at one time in 1 hour. It is just disrespectful to the committee, to Canadian public, to Quebec Francophones, and for those that speak French outside. So this is just very disappointing, this whole process, and I put this squarely on the shoulders and the blame on the Liberals, and it appears to be supported by the Liberals, by the NDP, but we will find out. So that's just the commentary I have right now. Thank you. En français. Je suis.
I am very disappointed by everything that's going on here with this motion that was tabled by the Liberals at the start. It seems that this was premeditated and planned to explode the work of this committee. I would like to call you back to order. Thank you, Mr. Dalton. The comments we're hearing are about the sub-amendments. Ms. Ashton, I see you are next on the speaking list. Quickly, I'd like to say that we did hear a debate. We're here to hear people's points of view. As I said at the start of the meeting, I'd also like to table a motion to allow us to move forward with this bill and to bring amendments to the bill. The point is to deliver on a promise for Francophone communities in Quebec and outside of Quebec. These people have been desperately waiting for a modernized act. This is the 16th meeting we've had. We've been saying since June that we want to move forward effectively, that we want to bring improvements to the bill. And this is what we'd like to propose later today. But it seems that we all have many points of view that we would like to share. But what's clear is that Francophone communities throughout Canada, as we've heard over the last 15 meetings, have been waiting for us to act efficiently. So I look forward to tabling my motion later today. And I'd also like to ask my colleagues, with as much respect as possible, I'd like them to imagine how to stop imagining how the NDP will vote. Why don't we move to a vote, and then we can finally start proceeding and moving forward and discuss we can stop discussing this theoretical debate that is just wasting the time of Francophone communities throughout the country. Mr. Beaulieu, I'd like to thank Ms. Ashton for saying that it's important to defend French in Francophone communities outside of Quebec. However, Quebec is not a community, it's a nation, it's a people. I think that we have a right to self-determination. That's something I wanted to clarify. Mr. Beaulieu, I think we need to see more witnesses. Mr. Beaulieu, one moment, please. We appreciate the nuance you're bringing to this discussion. It is my duty to restrict you to the sub-amendments that you've presented. The objective behind the sub-amendment is to give us more time to hear from witnesses. Initially, what was suggested is that we would have no more witnesses. Then Mr. Godin suggested something interesting. It allowed us more time. But I think we still need more time. That's why we're taking it to December 6th. We need to hear from witnesses that haven't appeared yet. You know, the Francophone and Acadian communities are not a monolithic single block. Some of them said they need large-scale reinforcement to the Act. And there's also a diversity of points of view that we haven't heard yet. There are stakeholders that told us that immersion schools are actually a place where Francophones get assimilated. So I think we need to include amendments to bring more funding to purely French language schools, first language French schools, or perhaps immersion schools should be managed by and for Francophones. I think maybe this could make everyone happy. There, again, are the Francophone and Acadian communities that can't be taken as a single community. They have a diversity of points of view. You know, in British Columbia, the situation is even more dire. Mr. Viss talked about it. I think we heard from Mr. Lepage, who might not have been from British Columbia, but his point of view was different from what we heard from other groups. He talked about a reparations bill, a right to reparations. And I think that this is true. You know, for Francophone communities outside of Quebec, there has been a ban on French education that lasted many generations. So yes, there should be a right to reparations. So other witnesses were supposed to appear and bring other points of view that are also important. For example, groups that receive funding because of the Official Languages Act. Mr. Chair, a point of order. Come on, this is getting out of control. There's a point of order for Mr. Seri. Yes, Mr. Chair, honestly, like Mrs. Ashton said earlier, and you know, Mr. Beaulieu, I appreciate you talking about Francophones outside of Quebec, even though you don't represent them. The people who appeared before this committee said that it was time to act. And I think what you'll see here is that we're not even talking about amendments. We're talking about other things. Mr. Chair, I'd like to move to a vote. Mr. Seri, that was not a point of order. That was just a comment, but I'd like to call everyone to order. Mr. Beaulieu, these are your own sub-amendments. What do you have to add about your own sub-amendments? Well, what I'd like to add is that they're very important because, you know, there are Francophone and Acadian communities who told me that this bill is unacceptable. It needs more teeth. We could have Mr. Lepage come back. There were others that were meant to speak. You know, I could go over this in detail. You know, there are some people that didn't have the opportunity to appear yet. And the witnesses that did appear would like us to bring some amendments to C-13. These amendments are very important. For example, that the central agency be under the Treasury Board and not Canadian Heritage. I think this is important. And, we were told that Canadian Heritage's minister didn't want to appear. And I think that's really a shame because in C13, Canadian Heritage is the central agency with some powers granted to the Treasury Board, and then we won't be able to hear from them. The only people we've heard from Canadian Heritage were officials. But officials don't have the right to have their true opinion. They have to feed us the lines that they were given. But the minister is responsible to the citizens, and he should tell us our point of view. But we won't be able to hear it, and that's why we need more time. Maybe the Minister for Canadian Heritage was unavailable on the days we suggested. Maybe the timelines were too short for him to appear. But I think it's essential that we hear from him. He should be able to speak to this bill. As I said earlier, there are witnesses that we haven't heard from. For example, witnesses that would have spoken to the fact that this is divisive, how we try so hard in Quebec to integrate our newcomers, that we keep on trying to attract more immigration. But if we increase the immigration thresholds, but we don't have the means to help them integrate in the French culture, we end up assimilating our own culture through the bill that's meant to protect us. It makes no sense. So this testimony from groups that are funded by the Official Languages Act, for example, the QCGN and others, their mandate is often taking a what seems to be a position saying that Quebecers are racist and that we only care about ourselves and not about newcomers. Well, this is harmful to the integration of newcomers in Quebec. And these groups use linguistic indicators that includes a large proportion of newcomers that need to be integrated to the French culture. It's vital if we want to maintain our demographic weight. We have to hear from them. And I feel like no one here truly wants to keep Quebecers and Francophones down. I don't think that anyone here is trying to do that. But we have to hear about it. Because, in fact, if we adopt the bill as it is, that's exactly what's going to happen. It's not even a matter of interpretation. There are many witnesses that were meant to appear and bring an original point of view on this question. For example, the president of the Société Saint-Jean-Baptiste de Montréal. This is the oldest institution that protects a nation like ours. It's the oldest institution in America. It's over 180 years old. Mr. Beaulieu, you're getting away from your sub-amendments. But what I wanted to say is that it's important for us to have the opportunity to hear from these witnesses. I think that, just phoning them up and telling that they're uninvited to do this to the main institution that's been invited for every battle in defense of Francophone and Acadian communities. This is one of the main organizations of civil society that protects French in Quebec is not going to be heard. We haven't heard her testimony.
Ça n'a pas de sens.
For me, that makes no sense. I'm sure the Conservatives and Liberals of witnesses who have been approached, who have important viewpoints that should be shared, and I believe that we should have a diversity of viewpoints. You can't just hear groups that are being funded by the federal government. What you need is a diversity of viewpoints. I think that the groups I've mentioned are very important. These are people who work on every day to make sure people can live in French. We all know assimilation is devastating, and those groups know it. Mr. Beaulieu. On Tuesday, I told committee members that a chair can remove interrupt someone who has the floor for 2 reasons. In cases of repetition, or in cases where the speaker is getting away from questions on the floor. You have already talked about why you have proposed a sub-amendment. Now you're getting off on some kind of a history lesson. Do you have anything to say about your sub-amendment that we haven't heard? Well, what I'm saying is that it's important to hear from witnesses. I think that's really important, thanks. Okay. Understood, Mr. Beaulieu. I believe Ms. Latanzia was the next to speak. Oh, okay. Her hand is lowered. Madam Clerk. Mr. Gord. Over to you, Mr. Gord. Chair, the pressure is on your shoulders. Because the governing party is controlling things now and is cutting back the witness list considerably. I know Minister Roberge from Quebec wanted to testify. So now you're being forced to turn down certain witnesses due to a lack of time. Right now, we're working to reform the Official Languages Act. I don't understand why we need to go so quickly. Is there some election coming up that I wasn't told about? Mr. Gord, we're getting away from... Chair, what I'm saying is that it is your responsibility to ensure that every witness wishing to appear before the committee has the ability to do so. We have not modified the Act for 50 years. We likely won't modify it again for 50 more years. There is no reason to move so quickly. It's not like there's another study on the horizon that is as important as a reform of the Official Languages Act. We've spent 4 hours arguing over commas when we could have been hearing from witnesses. So, Chair, it all falls to you. I don't know if you've been pressured somehow. I hope not. But help us do a good job as we reform the Official Languages Act. Thank you. Mr. Gord? Your colleague, Mr. Godin, proposed an amendment. And I believe that all the questions that you wish to ask me have already been considered by Mr. Godin. But right now we are talking about Mr. Beaulieu's sub-amendment. Any other points? Yes, Chair. Mr. Genereux. So our colleague is not here today, but I will note that Minister Roberge, the Minister of Francophone Affairs in Quebec, has reached out. He wishes to express extreme concern about the Liberal bill, and this is for a very simple reason. He was on a witness list, and I'm just going to read through people who were supposed to come before the committee. So Mark Power, who even wrote the FCFA amendments, the International Association of Conference Interpreters, the Bar Association, the Quebec government, the Canadian Bar Association, the Association des juristes d'expression française du Manitoba, and an additional hour with the Commissioner of Official Languages, the Francophone school boards, Miss Marie-France Lapierre, the FG Fédération de Jeunesse Canadienne Française, the Association Françaiscoise, Femmes de la Francophonie Canadienne, Air Canada, people who are pursuing legal action against Air Canada. And as Mr. Gord noted, we've wasted almost 4 hours. I'm concerned about the fate of the study. All of this to say, though, one thing is for sure. The Quebec Minister of Francophone Affairs called up Mr. Godin to express concern, and I think that the committee needs to hear from him. And I'm being careful. I know some people have been on the committee for a long time. Mr. Sampson is a parliamentary secretary. We have a duty before us. We have a responsibility to the Francophonie. Since 2009, we've been hearing about the bill, and yes, this is an important bill, one that has been discussed for a long time, that has come and gone. But we need to discuss it in full. And what the committee is now doing is saying, no, we've heard enough. We don't need to hear from you. Ms. Ashton noted that we need to act. Well, I do agree. But as noted, this is a historic moment. We will not talk about the bill again for 50 years. Except for regulations, of course. I know we heard from a number of witnesses, but I don't want to have the FCFA or its members come and criticize the bill. Right now, we are talking about how to modernize the OLA. We need to do it right. Up until now, we have been working very collaboratively to get the bill passed as quickly as possible. And again, I will note that the governing party needs to ensure that the bill is studied properly at this committee. The fact that they're imposing a gag order on us is disgraceful. Thank you, Mr. Genereux. Moving on. Anyone else? Anyone else on Mr. Beaulieu's sub-amendment? Nope. All right. Then I believe what comes next is a vote. Nominal vote. A quick reminder, we are voting on Mr. Beaulieu's sub-amendment.
No.
Monsieur Sanson.
No.
Monsieur McDonald.
Contre.
Monsieur Lauzon.
No.
Madame Latanzio.
Non.
Monsieur Gourde.
Oui.
Monsieur Dalton.
Oui.
Monsieur Généreux.
Oui.
Monsieur Viss.
Oui.
Monsieur Beaulieu.
Oui.
Et Madame Ashton.
Non.
Madame la greffière, juste pour les gens qui sont sur...
Madam Clerk, just for people on Zoom, we did not hear Mr. Genereux. Mr. Genereux voted yay. So, 6 yeas, 5 nays. Sub-amendment is defeated. Point of order. Did you mean 6 nays? Six nays, 5 yeas. The clerk got it backwards. 6 nays, 5 yeas. Sorry about that. There's a lot of replacements today. I'm trying to keep track of everything. No worries. We are all on the same page. We now move to Mr. Godin's amendment. And I believe Ms. Ashton... Oh, point of order. Mr. Généreux on a point of order. I'd like to table to move a sub-amendment. I'd like to move it right now on the floor. Well, Ms. Ashton has the floor now. Okay, we'll talk about Ms. Ashton's sub-amendment. I have noted your name on the list. Ms. Ashton, over to you. Okay, I think you can hear me. I'm going to move an amendment based on an amendment to the original motion. After point 4, the following paragraph would be added. Subject to the approval of the recognized parties' whips and the availability of meeting slots from the House of Commons, the committee hold additional meetings for the clause-by-clause consideration of the bill and then former point 5 would become point 6. That if instead of the date will be replaced with Thursday, December 8th. That would be the new deadline for clause by clause. We would then be having 6 meetings and potentially longer meetings or additional meetings. The final deadline would be December 8th. A copy of the motion has been sent to the clerk, so she could share it with committee members. You mentioned December 8th, 2022, sorry. Point of order. Point of order, Chair. I believe Mr. Gord has a point of order. You just said that we were talking about Mr. Godin's amendment. Ms. Ashton is now moving a new amendment which does not sub-amend Mr. Godin's amendment. Mr. Généreux was ready to propose a sub-amendment to Mr. Godin's amendment. Procedurally, shouldn't we not go ahead with that sub-amendment? You are right, Mr. Gord. My apologies. Sorry. Ms. Ashton, I'm sorry. We do need to consider Mr. Godin's amendment. My apologies. Thank you to Mr. Gord and committee members. We are discussing Mr. Godin's amendment. We still have not gotten back to the main motion. Mr. Généreux, over to you. I move a sub-amendment in line 4 that the committee... Sorry, I'm looking at a different amendment. Okay. Sorry, the versions are just multiplying. Okay, number 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. So at the end of point 4, we would add, prior to clause by clause, that the Quebec government have the ability to testify and discuss its proposed amendments. Mr. Godin, Quebec has already turned down a speaking request. Well, this morning the Quebec government reached out to Mr. Godin, and given recent developments, I believe we should give them another invitation because they have very interesting amendments to the bill that they are proposing. We would like them to have an opportunity to propose amendments to the bill. I hope that we will be able to hear from them so that they can present their amendments. Well, sure, but all provincial governments already received an invitation. Yes, but that was 3 weeks ago. And there's a new minister in place. They reached out to Mr. Godin's office this morning. what that shows is that the Quebec government is very interested in this bill and is seized with Mr. Serre's motion. Okay, can you go through that one more time before we move on to a discussion? Yes, so after the end of point 4, we would note that, and prior to clause by clause, that Quebec have the ability to testify or submit amendments in order to present their amendments. Okay, that is clear. Ms. Ashton. And me next, Chair. Well, first I have a question, a procedural question. We have a letter dated October 13th. It is signed by the Chief of Staff to the Quebec Premier. This letter states that all amendments were already sent and that they do not wish to testify. We didn't get this letter 6 months ago. It's only 2 weeks old. So, of course, new ministers can be appointed and change does happen. But the letter is extremely recent. We have had 16 meetings already. Quebec has already sent documents. I hope that all of us have taken the time to read what the Quebec government proposes. And so I do appreciate that Mr. Godin's office has been contacted. But what I don't understand is how the Chief of Staff to the Quebec Premier can say, no, we won't testify, and then things can change. Do we want to play political games, or do we want to move forward with a historic effort that will make a big difference for the Quebec nation and Francophones across Canada? Chair, may I respond? We'll give the floor to Mr. Serre, and then we may have to respond briefly. Thank you, Chair. As noted, we've heard 54 witnesses over 16 meetings. We've received 21 briefs. One of these briefs, as noted by Ms. Ashton, comes from the government of Quebec. Quebec has already submitted their recommendations for the bill. They have stated that they will not come before the committee. I don't understand why now there are bilateral talks going on between the Quebec government and the Conservative Party. Quebec has turned down a request to come before the committee. They sent amendments. We will consider them. Of course, it is very important to hear from the Quebec government. So they have proposed amendments. That's fine. It's an element that should be studied. What I don't understand is why the Conservative government is now suggesting this other amendment, unless it's the fact that they want to hold up the bill. We have heard from witnesses. We have received briefs. Now is time to act. And I believe the committee's job is to move forward and move the study forward. Thank you. First, there's a technical question about Mr. Généreux's sub-amendment. Before we even get into its context, I'd like to hear from the clerk on this. This might not be receivable because it would depart from Mr. Godin's amendment. It seems to really stretch and dilute the amendment we are discussing. It's bringing in elements that are too far removed. But before making a decision, I'd like to hear from the clerk. Yes. Well, I can read the relevant section in Boscan Gagnon. Of course, I can't make a decision. I can only tell you what is stated in the section on rulings by the chair. A sub-amendment cannot introduce new elements into an amendment or differ substantially from an amendment. All right.
Alors, vous voyez, M. Généreux.
Mr. Généreux, as far as that standing order is concerned, amending paragraph 4 by including something that is unrelated, except for a change of date, as proposed by your colleague, Mr. Gaudin, I think that that's something that's separate. It would be a bit of a stretch, and it's not related. I'd like to hear your input, but otherwise I'm going to proceed with my decision. Mr. Gaudin first, please. Mr. Généreux, please. Please go first. Well, I think that the wording of the addition, the sub-amendment, or whatever you want to call it, that the terminology that I would use isn't actually too much of a stretch vis-à-vis the motion that we have on the table. On the contrary, my sub-amendment makes it clear how important the province of Quebec is and its needs when it comes to the Canadian and Quebec francophonie. And I don't think that the wording of my sub-amendment kind of flies in the face of the pith and substance of the motion. On the contrary, Mr. Généreux, I understand what you're intending to do here, but from a technical standpoint, paragraph 4 of Mr. Gaudin's amendment that you are seeking to amend deals with a change in date, has nothing to do with inviting witnesses to appear. And under the standing orders, one cannot amend a sub-amendment or an amendment when the sub-amendment doesn't refer back to the central theme of the amendment. Mr. Chair, I'm a bit confused about what's going on here because Mr. Beaulieu's paragraph 5 didn't carry earlier, and now you're trying to knock back my sub-amendment vis-à-vis Quebec. So that's 2 times in a row. Mr. Généreux, if I may, well, if I may, Mr. Généreux, please, respectfully, please honour my decisions. I don't think this is a game of baseball, and this is, you heard the standing order that the clerk read out loud, and as chairperson, I have to make a decision. Well, before you make a decision, Mr. Chair, I do have a point I'd like to make. Mr. Beaulieu, I've noted down that you're next on the speakers list, but Mr. Généreux's sub-amendment, that's what we're dealing with now. On a point of order, would you like to withdraw it based on what you heard from the clerk, or would you like me to make a decision? Please proceed and make a decision. On a point of order, Mr. Chairperson. Go ahead, Mr. Beaulieu, on a point of order. Well, first, I'd like Mr. Généreux's proposal to be read again out loud, and then I'll chime in. I don't think that it's a stretch at all. It's not unrelated. It's not unrelated information here whatsoever. This will give the Quebec government an opportunity to have input. There's a new minister that's just started. And so this is a gag order here, and I don't think that their demands will be heard if we don't deal with this. Yes, Mr. Beaulieu. According to the standing order, if the sub-amendment is unrelated to the subject matter, and let's bear in mind the subject matter of the main amendment, and we're talking here about paragraph 4 of the amendment proposed by Mr. Gaudin, it's about changing a date. And I'm going to read it word for word. The committee would proceed with clause-by-clause consideration of the bill by Tuesday, 29th of November, 5 p.m. instead of the 22nd of November. That is the pith and substance. Now, under the standing order, and this is a hypothetical example, sir, if let's say you wanted it to be the 3rd of December instead of the 29th of November, well, the subject matter is a change of date. It's not about when witnesses will appear or not. And that's the decision that I'm forced to take here regarding the substance. I'm not in any way criticizing the format. Well, could we just read Mr. Généreux's proposal, if possible? On a point of order, Mr. Chairperson, and this is in a collaborative spirit that I raise this point of order. Mr. Chairperson, given that I've been a Member of Parliament for 16 years and I have quite a wealth of experience in this regard, perhaps you'll decide that the sub-amendment is out of order vis-à-vis Mr. Godin's amendment. Now, if it is out of order, could the amendment fall under the main motion and in that way be in order? Do you get my drift? Well, yes, one can amend amendments, Mr. Gould, to the extent that it doesn't come from the sponsor or the mover of the amendment. But yes, you're right. Well, if you decide that this sub-amendment can't be part of Mr. Godin's amendment, we could come back and try and amend the main amendment. Is that correct? Yes. The only person that can't do that is the mover of the original amendment. So you're saying that Mr. Généreux could come back with exactly the same formulation, but not Mr. Godin, says the Chair. Mr. Chair. Mr. Beaulieu, is that what you wanted to refer to? Well, on your point of order, I'd like the motion to be read out loud, Mr. Généreux's motion. Can we do that, please? Please go ahead, Mr. Généreux. The point 4, the committee would proceed with clause-by-clause consideration of the bill by X, Y, or Z date in December, and it would read as follows, that prior to a clause-by-clause consideration, Quebec would have the opportunity to testify or to submit its brief before amendments are moved in order to safeguard its position. So basically what the Quebec government is asking us to do here is give them an opportunity, quite simply, to make proposals or to tell us in writing what they'd like to propose or safeguard what's already been put on the table by the Quebec government. Mr. Beaulieu, is that okay with you? Well, that will have a bearing on the substance of the motion, won't it? Because if we go with that, then we'll have to extend the period for witnesses to appear so that the Quebec government can testify, right? Well, before we address the substance, we need to address the format. I don't want to give you any clues to what my intentions are, but perhaps Mr. Godin has other paragraphs that he might like to put forward that would do the job. Is there unanimous consent? Well, first, Mr. Généreux, would you like to withdraw your sub-amendment? Well, instead of withdrawing it, as Mr. Gould is proposing, could I tack it on to another amendment, just as you just mentioned that was possible? I understand what you're saying as far as the substance is concerned, but your issue is that point 4 deals with the change of date, and my proposal doesn't deal with a date, but adds additional information. So perhaps we'll go ahead, make your proposal, and let's see if there's unanimous consent. Is there unanimous consent to what I'm calling for? But hold on, your option B, what would it be? What would it look like exactly? And then I'll recognize Ms. Latanzio. Well, right off the bat, and I'm looking at where I can insert this, but I think everyone's understood that we want to give the Quebec government an opportunity to be called back to present amendments or have some opportunity to do so before we proceed with clause-by-clause consideration of the bill. I don't think that anyone's going to stand up against that, are they? Can we just suspend for a couple of minutes, Mr. Chairperson, so I can put my finger on exactly where I would like to insert that? Well, let's just hear from Ms. Latanzio first. Yes, Mr. Chairperson, just a point of clarification. From what I understand from Mr. Godin's remarks, he'd like to withdraw the amendment, and then after the suspension, he's going to come back with another amendment. Is that correct? Well, it was my understanding that Mr. Genereux is going to present that amendment in a different context to paragraph 4, so that the main pith and substance of the amendments is maintained. But is he withdrawing it? Mr. Genereux, for the time being, are you withdrawing your sub-amendment? Mr. Chair, just give me 3 minutes, if you would. I just want to make sure I do things right here. Absolutely. 3 minutes. Mr. Genereux, you mean? Sorry, Mr. Genereux. Sorry to mix you up. You've been mixing me up for quite a moment now, except I'm not quite as fat as him. My mic was on. You caught me red-handed, but here's my proposal, and for the benefit of Ms. Latanzio. Let's delete it from point 4 and take up point 5, which had been deleted. And instead of having the word but at the start of my sentence, I'd say prior to this, the Quebec government would have an opportunity to present its position and or testify. And then we can vote on that if that suits everyone. From what I can see, everyone seems to agree with that. Well, if there's unanimous consent, that's great, but I might have a suggestion to make. Is there unanimous consent? Can Mr. Genereux move his amendment to paragraph 5? Well, paragraph 5, in fact, we deleted the deadline or drop-dead date for clause-by-clause consideration. So there's no more subject matter. It's been stripped of all of its subject matter, hasn't it, paragraph 5? Mr. Genereux, under paragraph 1, well, we invite witnesses, right? That just happens to be what Mr. Godin is calling for here. Well, it was my understanding... Mr. Genereux, please proceed. Mr. Chair, whether it's under paragraph 1 or paragraph 5... well, it's up to you to put it where you see fit. But the important thing is that we all agree that we need to invite the Quebec government back so that they can present their amendments in person or send them in writing before we proceed with clause-by-clause consideration. Listen, we've got 5 minutes left, and the technical and support staff have a hard stop at 1 on the dot. So do we have unanimous consent? Just a point of information, says Mr. Beaulieu. Mr. Godin's motion strikes point 5, doesn't it? There'd be no deadline for the clause-by-clause consideration. Inaudible for the interpreter. Let's insert that under point 1. The mover of the motion seems to be in agreement. What's important here is that the central element of Mr. Godin's amendment was that there would be no drop-dead date any longer for the clause-by-clause consideration. So unless we want to distort or skew this, the meaning of this motion, and I don't think that's what Mr. Généreux intends to do here, perhaps it might be opportune to insert it under, well, Mr. Généreux is asking permission from the committee to add under Section 1 my sub-amendment, which would be, and I don't know what the new date is, Ms. Ashton mentioned it, but before amendments are presented, that the Quebec government would have an opportunity to submit its proposals and or testify. Do we have unanimous consent so that Mr. Généreux can change his sub-amendment so that it falls under paragraph 1 of Mr. Godin's sub-amendment? Do we have unanimous consent around the table? Well, Mr. Chairperson, before we proceed with the vote, just a point of clarification, if I may, says Ms. Latanzio. At this stage of the game, do we have any witnesses that have been called to appear and who have agreed to appear and testify before the 24th of November? Or between now and the 24th of December? Has the clerk scheduled any witnesses between now and the 24th of November? And if so, who are they? And of course, were we to agree to Mr. Godin's amendment, we'd have to bear all of that in mind. Well, yes, exactly. That, Madam Clerk, do we have confirmed witnesses on the slate? Yes, on Tuesday, 15th of November, that's the committee's next meeting date, we have Minister Fraser and her officials that have confirmed their appearance on that date, and Juris Power will appear earlier than scheduled for 2 hours on the 15th of November. So it's up to the committee to decide who they'd like to hear from on the 15th. Now, on the 17th, we have the Minister of Official Languages and the President of the Treasury Board confirmed 2 hours, Thursday, 17th of November. Then Tuesday, the 29th of December, that was the original date for the appearance of Juris Power for a 2-hour appearance. Then on the 24th, we'll have a list of witnesses, but I haven't invited them yet because I was waiting to see what the committee was going to do in terms of its time slot. Mr. Chairperson, with Ms. Latanzio, just hold on a sec, please. No, please go ahead. Just let me get this right and make sure we're on the same page. The witnesses have been called in for the 15th. We have Minister Fraser as well as Juris Power. They've confirmed their attendance. On the 17th, we have our Minister, Madam Petitpot-Taylor, and the only time slot left is the 22nd, which originally was set aside for Juris Power's appearance. Well, if Minister Fraser does come on the 15th, and that's the committee's priority, I'll ask Juris Power if they can still come on the 22nd, which was their original date. Well, could Juris Power come on the 15th just for 1 hour? Unless, I'm just wondering, well, they could have 2 hours on the 22nd or 1 hour on the 15th. Well, it's up to the committee to decide, but there was a motion that carried for a 2-hour appearance per minister. Now, has Juris Power confirmed their appearance for the 15th? That's my question. Well, yes, they did confirm, and I just heard from Minister Fraser's office. I haven't had an opportunity to discuss the date and time frame with Juris Power yet.
Can we suspend, Mr. Chair, so that we can manage this witness management question before we dispose of the amendment by my colleague, Mr. Généreux? We have no choice but to suspend because the time is up and the technical teams has told us that we cannot go over the time. So we'll have to suspend as we're in the middle of a bit of a tornado here. So we'll suspend until next week. I'm so sorry about this. We just don't have the technical resources required to support the committee beyond the time we had. Meeting is suspended.